So in our last lesson, we talked about U.S. v. Lopez, and that is one of those required court cases for the AP exam. So in this lesson, we're going to look at a couple more cases, Supreme Court cases, dealing with federalism. These aren't required for the exam, but they're good to know because they illustrate how federalism has evolved over time. So the first one we're going to look at is U.S. v. Windsor, and this is in 2013. Now, before we get into the details of the case, you have to understand the Defense of Marriage Act of 1996. And this act stated that for the purpose of federal law, the words marriage and spouse referred to legal unions between one man and one woman. So under the Defense of Marriage Act, also known as DOMA, marriage was between one man and one woman. That's how it was recognized under federal law. However, since that time, some states had started authorizing same-sex marriage. So under the federal law, marriage was between one man and one woman. That's how it was recognized. However, under some state laws, they had started recognizing same-sex marriage. So Edith Windsor was the widow and sole executor of the estate of her late spouse, Thea Clara Spire, who died in 2009. Now, their marriage was recognized by New York state law. However, DOMA is still in place at this point, so it's not recognized under that federal law. So Spire left her estate to her spouse, but because their marriage wasn't recognized by DOMA, the government is going to impose heavy taxes on that estate. Now, had their marriage been recognized under that federal law, the estate would have qualified for a marital exemption and no taxes would have been imposed. So Windsor is going to file suit seeking a declaration that DOMA, that Defense of Marriage Act, was unconstitutional. So the question that the court is going to have to consider is, does DOMA deprive same-sex couples who are legally married under state laws of their Fifth Amendment rights to equal protection under federal law? And the court is going to rule that states, not the federal government, have the authority to define marital relationships, and that DOMA, so the Defense of Marriage Act, goes against legislative and historical precedent by undermining that authority. So the court is ruling that it is the state's authority to make decisions about marriage laws. The court is going to rule that DOMA denies same-sex couples the rights that come from federal recognition of marriages, and it also stated that DOMA imposed a separate status on same-sex couples and was in violation of the Fifth Amendment guarantee of equal protection. So this case is giving states the authority to define marriage. Now, DOMA is declared unconstitutional with this case in 2013. However, in a later case, which we will talk a little bit more about in our civil liberties unit, the court is going to go even further and strike down any state laws that are banning same-sex marriage. Okay, so in this case, it is striking down that federal law against same-sex marriage. The next case that we're going to look at is Gonzalez v. Raich, and this is from 2005. So in 1996, California voters passed the Compassionate Use Act, legalizing marijuana for medical use. However, the state law, so that California state law, is going to conflict with the Controlled Substances Act, a federal law which bans the possession of marijuana. So this is going to go back to that supremacy clause, that federal law comes before state law. Okay, so it's in direct conflict. The state law is allowing marijuana use. The federal law bans it. So after the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, federal administration, seized doctor-prescribed marijuana from a patient's home, Angel Raich and Diane Monson, who are actually users of the medical marijuana, are going to sue the DEA and the U.S. Attorney General. Now, Raich had homegrown marijuana, as had Monson, so they're going to seize that homegrown marijuana. Both have been prescribed by doctors to use this medical marijuana. Raich had constant pain, and the doctor actually said that her medical marijuana use was keeping her alive because she was allergic to other prescription medications. So this was the only type of medication she could use. Whereas Monson had been in a car accident and had chronic pain. So again, the doctor had described this to help ease her pain. So the users, so Raich and Monson, are going to argue that the Controlled Substance Act exceeded Congress's Commerce Clause power. So the question that the court is going to be faced with is, does that Controlled Substances Act exceed Congress's power under the Commerce Clause as applied to interstate cultivation and possession of marijuana for medical use? Okay, so this Controlled Substances Act doesn't recognize medical marijuana. That's one thing to keep in mind. So the court is going to hold that the Commerce Clause gave Congress the authority to prohibit the local cultivation and use of marijuana despite laws to the contrary. Okay, so the court is saying that under the Commerce Clause, Congress has the power to regulate marijuana use. The court said precedent firmly established Congress's Commerce Clause power to regulate local activities that have a substantial effect on interstate commerce. So Congress can ban local marijuana use and cultivation because it can affect supply and demand in the national market. So the court is saying that banning the growth for medical use is a way to prevent or limit access to marijuana for other uses. Okay, so this is within Congress's Commerce Clause power. And that is the end of this lesson.